Good afternoon, everyone, or morning, depending on where you're joining from. My name is Timothy Blatch, and I work in ICLEI Africa Secretariat, and I'm with the Cities Biodiversity Centre. And we'd like to give a very warm welcome to everyone joining the webinar. This is our second webinar in the Post-2020 series, and we're very excited to have you with us today. In today's webinar, we'll be looking at ICLEI's submission to the SCBD Global Biodiversity Framework discussion document, and we will be wanting to have a conversation around this in light of the SCBD regional consultations that are taking place currently. So the format of today's webinar will be a presentation prepared by Oliver Hillel from the SCBD. He's unable to join us this afternoon, so his presentation will be presented by Kobe Brandt, the Regional Director of ICLEI Africa, as well as the Cities Biodiversity Centre. And then we will follow by Kobe's presentation on ICLEI's submissions to the discussion document. Before we begin, just to let you know that this webinar will be recorded, and we will make the links available in a follow-up email, as well as post the videos on both the ICLEI and Cities with Nature YouTube channels. The format of the webinar will, as I've mentioned, be these two presentations, after which we will invite some questions and hopefully have a very rich discussion afterwards. So there are two ways in which you can ask questions. The first is by either raising your hand. The second is by posting in the chat box, but we ask that we run through the presentations and then we take questions and discussions from there. So welcome, and it's wonderful to have you with us. And at this point, I will hand over to Kobe.
Thank you very much, Timothy. And yes, a warm welcome from all of us here from sunny Cape Town. So yes, last week I think was absolutely an historic week for nature and for all of us working in the space of nature and biodiversity. And I can just say from ICLEI's side here, where we are coordinating the voice of all levels of subnational government, local and subnational government, getting ready to engage with the parties of the CBD and with the rest of the world in terms of what cities and other subnational governments can, want, and should be contributing to the post-2020 thinking and also implementation of what comes out of China. Last week was certainly a most inspirational week for us. And in fact, this presentation was completed before the documents were released last week, and it's really nice to see how much reinforcement we got last week from the documents that came out. So I'm going to take us through the presentation. And the first presentation is going to be, well, the first few slides are focusing on Oliver Hillel's presentation, and he sends his regards. He's in a meeting with other colleagues of ours and a number of our very close alliances from around the world at the World Bank offices in New York, in DC, specifically focusing on cities and nature. So hopefully in our next webinar, we'll get some feedback from that meeting as well. So Oliver has prepared a few slides, and I think it's very important just to demonstrate also with these slides and reinforce with these slides the fact that we're doing this with the full blessing and in fact on request of the Convention on Biological Diversity, gathering our constituency, gathering the voices of our constituency of local and subnational governments, to be able to make meaningful inputs into the discourse around a new post-2020 global biodiversity framework. And we're doing this in close partnership with many of our other city networks and regional government networks like NRG4SD, the Committee of Regions, etc. But it's very good to know that we stand we stand very strongly with the CBD and get that support, institutional support from them in this process. So Oliver highlighted in this slide that yes, it's still very early days and we cannot see what the post-2020 framework is going to look like, the action agenda for nature, but some things are coming through. One of the key things is that the world wants to keep the vision for 2050, which is of course a vision that sees people living in harmony with nature, meaning that we're living within the planetary bounds. And then also there's a very strong recognition that whatever comes out from China needs to be aligned with existing platforms and initiatives such as the Paris Agreement, the World of Climate, the SDGs, the Sendai Framework, the IP-based report that came out last week, etc. So the New Urban Agenda, etc. So it really wants to build and strengthen, build on and strengthen the other global agreements that are out there. And then they also feel very strongly about a ratchet mechanism, which will keep moving us forward in a sense that the world collectively or individual sectors, whether it's national governments or other levels of government or the private sector or the NGOs, academia, etc., we will pledge, we will review, and then we will ratchet. And that is an ongoing iterative process linked to smart goals and smart engagements with clear milestones. So that is also something that we strongly support and something that seems to be coming through in all the discourses so far. At the same time, the CBD parties are keeping all options open, and they are looking for ambitious proposals that they can align with, such as no net loss for biodiversity. And if you just look at the IP-based report of last week, you will see that we're looking at the extinction of 1 million species. So if we look at a no net loss of biodiversity, that's a very, very far way off from losing 1 million species in the next decades ahead of us. So, well, not decades, but a few hundred years. And then, of course, another key aspect for them is mainstreaming. And those of you who have attended the last COPs in Cancun and in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt since 2016, you will see that really the CBD has been embracing the mainstreaming aspect of their work, and they want to see nature being mainstreamed and biodiversity being mainstreamed into a whole range of sectors, as mentioned there. So when it comes to the ambitions for local and subnational governments, the CBD is actually very enthusiastic, and they really recognize more and more the role of local governments. We are still working within the plan of action on subnational governments, cities and other local authorities, which runs until 2020 and which was adopted in Nagoya at the COP in Nagoya. And I must just say that that was a milestone adoption by the parties, that they really recognized for the first time in any multi-governance conference of parties, long before the climate UNFCCC processes mentioned in name the role of local and subnational governments, the CBD parties actually adopted this plan of action and recognizing thereby and pledging support for subnational and local governments, and recognizing that it's here at the local level where a lot of the Aichi targets and associated indicators, etc., need to find ground and hit the ground basically. As some of our colleagues often say, it's at the local level where the rubber hits the road. And the CBD Convention was the first of the Rio Conventions to actually recognize that in writing at that milestone decision. So the parties have also been encouraging more and more recognition and engagement by themselves with local governments in drafting their NBSAPs, their National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plans, which is the mechanism within the CBD COP where parties pledge their commitments, their aspirations, and also their progress related to those aspirations and commitments. So it's the MRV process in a way, to what people would talk about in the climate space. It's much less defined and a little bit more open for interpretation than in the climate space, but this is the tool that national parties use, and there's been great progress made over the last years where there's been encouragement towards the parties to include local and subnational governments when they formulate their NBSAPs and also when they implement under the report on the NBSAPs, recognizing that if they do this with the support and active engagement of the local and subnational community, their NBSAPs can be so much more meaningful, gain so much more traction, and actually deliver so much more in line with the aspirations of the CBD itself. So there were also more actionable elements from within the local and subnational community that came out of our communiques from our summits that we've been holding, the city summits that we've been holding adjacent to each of these COPs for the last 6 COPs now. But specifically, I want to draw your attention to the Quintana Roo communique and the Sharm el-Sheikh communique, where a lot of pledges were made by the subnational and local community, but there were also requests and calls made towards national governments and other actors in terms of creating an enabling environment for local and subnational governments within which they can make their contributions, which are so absolutely essential if we are talking about attaining the Aichi targets or any post-2020 arrangement that may follow. And then just to say that they recognize that local and subnational governments have a key role to play in a wide range of areas which are linked to the CBD, food and water security, health, disaster risk reduction, green cities, but also the green economy, jobs, livelihoods, etc. Oliver also went further to say that this is a very collaborative process where we don't only focus very much on multi-level governance, vertical and horizontal mainstreaming between different levels of government, which I've spoken about, but also between the agencies and the networks and the role players within the local and subnational space. So yeah, I want to point out, although ICLEI is presenting these webinars to you and asking your engagement, it's not just for ICLEI and ICLEI members, it's really for the much broader community of practice and our growing family of networks that are engaging and mobilizing cities and other actors to take up action on the ground. So we're doing this in close partnership with role players like NRG4SD, the European Committee of Regions, Goals, and many other partners. And we'd like to see this family grow. So please share it within your constituencies and ask them to engage in these webinars. And we can even address and allow over the months ahead for you to share with us what your plans are and what you're doing. We'd like to hear your voices. We'd like to come strongly together with one voice on behalf of our collective constituency that we can take into the post-2020 discussions. And then just to say that there is great recognition for our new Cities with Nature platform, which is being launched and activated with its first pathway later this month on the 22nd of May on International Biodiversity Day, as a matter of fact. Over 60 cities and regional governments have already signed up to Cities with Nature, and it was decided with our founding partners, the Nature Conservancy and IUCN and the CBD, that Cities with Nature would be the platform which would collect and where we would also share the growing voice of subnational and local governments towards post-2020 and also afterwards when it comes to implementation of the post-2020 agreement. And then, yes, we do need to recognize the new science-based investments ahead of the Sharm el-Sheikh COP. There was a paper which many of us collaborated on called the NUCA paper, or Nature in the Urban Century document, which gave us a lot of scientific basis and which was now very much reinforced also and strengthened by the IPBES 7 report that came out last week. And this summarizes basically the inputs from the CBD at this stage. I'm quickly moving ahead now to our contribution, and I'm not going to tell you much about ICLEI or the Cities Biodiversity Centre. You're welcome to go and have a look at our website. I think many of you know us as well. And just to say that we do not only implement projects, but we also play a very active and leading role towards building a community of advocates for recognizing and mandating and enabling and capacitating and financing the role of local and subnational governments when it comes to the implementation of the COP decisions. So that's why ICLEI has been so active in the COPs, the CBD COPs for over a decade, and why we are also taking on this engagement around the post-2020 future that lies ahead of us. But we have intensified our advocacy work quite greatly for COP15 because we know it's such a milestone event. And I also think we've been seeing a real coming together of minds here, not only from the local and subnational governments, but also from our national friends, our friends in the parties, and our friends in the private sector and in the NGO sector, and last but not least, within our urban communities. Our mayors are ready to lead and lead quite boldly a collective effort through Cities with Nature and associated initiatives. And our urban communities are calling for it, you know, so our mayors are responding in a way that we've not seen before. So we're living in unprecedented times. Yes, in terms of challenges, but also in terms of opportunities towards mobilizing large-scale and wide-scale city action and subnational action at all levels. So that's why we have been contributing to the formal processes so far, and ICLEI has put in a submission on behalf of ICLEI only at this stage, which we will share with you, all the participants in this webinar, responding to the draft open paper, which was released by the CBD that captured the thinking at that stage. Our contribution went in on the deadline of the 15th of April, and we made a couple of key points there. One of the first points we made was that the plan of action, the Nagoya Plan of Action, adopted by Decision 1022 by the parties, is really significant. It's a first in the world of its kind for any Rio Convention, as I said, and the spirit of that needs to live on. It needs to be strengthened, and we need to build on that. We also are saying that, yes, for those who have not recognized it fully yet, it is on the ground. It is in our cities, in our towns, in our city regions. in that interface where mainstreaming happens best and where integration is part of our daily lives. Our cities do not treat biodiversity as a standalone. In every land use decision, in every infrastructure decision that cities are making every day around the world, as they're expanding at astounding rates in some places, nature is part of that decision, and we're making either good decisions for nature or not so good decisions. And if we can be clearer about our mandates and about our roles and have better capacity, we will be able to make sure that cities make wiser choices as we move forward. The other point, the next point that we made in our comments on the open paper was a recommendation that the parties consider to further build upon and strengthen this plan of action in the spirit of cooperation and co-creation and co-production in a way that's never been seen before. Because we know it's, although nature is something that really lives in and outside of cities, the urban population, is growing at a rapid rate, and we are depending more and more on the finite resources provided by nature, whether it's within the city region boundaries or outside of the city region boundaries. So our cities need to be aware, our cities need to look at how they produce, consume, react, and care for and engage with nature, and therefore they are critical players in the post-2020 discussions and implementation. And I think I've spoken about the competencies. It's not everywhere in the world where roles and mandates are very clear for subnational governments. In many places around the world, we see that there's still a lot of centralized decision-making when it comes to nature. Many local and subnational governments are not capacitated and not mandated to take on the role that they should in being the custodians and being the first level of governance to engage with nature. And we're calling for greater recognition of the need to devolve these powers in a way that is also responsible, that comes with the capacity that's needed, that comes with the resources that are needed, etc., to the levels of government where these decisions are actually made. And then, I think the urban-rural dimension is also something we feel very strongly about. So as we all know, nature and biodiversity is not bound or limited by the cadastral boundaries or the formal boundaries of any municipality. It really flows between the city and the region around that city. As we see, for instance, Mexico City's entire watershed is almost outside of Mexico City. So there's a compelling need for our cities to work in a regional context and to think in a regional context, and for our regional governments to think and act and plan with the big cities and the towns and the urban settlements within that regional or higher level of subnational government, because it is there where the exchanges between nature and people take place naturally every day, but it's also there where we need to secure the strong urban-rural linkages that will secure food, that will secure ongoing ecosystem services, water, all the dependencies that we have on nature actually come from in and around our cities. Therefore, strong rural-urban linkages are very important if we move into a more sustainable future. I'm not going to say much about cities with nature, but just to say that we are as part of that process, undertaking an assessment of how past COP decisions have actually enabled and accelerated and supported our work at local and subnational levels, and that report will come out as part of our post-2020 work. But we have also established a local and subnational government engagement platform where we want to see rigorous debate and a lot of participation from everybody. And this does not only mean cities and other levels of subnational governments, it really means also our friends in the parties, our friends in science, and our friends in the NGO communities and international development agencies and financiers to come together in this space. So the post-2020 platform is held within the Cities with Nature platform, and it is here where we will actually post all the documents, all the papers that are coming out of the process, all these webinars, links to all these webinars, links to the YouTube channels, the Twitter accounts, all of that. This is the place to go. The one-stop shop, basically, if you want to be part of the local and subnational government engagement platform. This platform will be supported by our colleagues in Energy for SD and the Committee of Regions and other role players, and we strongly encourage you to engage in that platform firsthand and come and make your voices heard. So I just wanted to point out that one of the key things we will be focusing on in formulating our decision would be to look at how one can strengthen engagement by local and other subnational actors in the NBSAP approach. The NBSAP approach is likely to stay. It may be made more as I said, with attached with smart goals and more output-driven and more standardized, more like what we know in the climate world in terms of MRV targets, etc., measurable, reliable, and verifiable targets. Here in the biodiversity context, they're talking about smart targets, which of course are time-bound, etc., etc. So the NBSAP process will probably be strengthened and a little bit more maybe formalized, but it is very important that we recognize that there are already guidelines out there, and you can see a copy of those guidelines that we produced with support from the Convention on Biological Diversity on how local governments and subnational governments can actually strengthen the NBSAP guideline process so that from both ways, bottom up and top down, different levels of government can meet each other, share responsibilities, and collectively achieve so much better. So that will be quite a strong focus as we move forward. And we've spoken about the transformational change that is needed. This was emphasized so well last week in the three very important documents that came out. And these three documents, of course, are the IPBES 7 report, which you've all now familiarized yourself with, I'm sure, but also a very important report that came out from the OECD that was developed specifically for the G7 meeting, the presidency, the French presidency, who held the G7 environmental ministers meeting on 5 and 6 May, just a few days ago. In fact, yeah, literally at the end of last week. So this report is called Biodiversity Finance and the Economic and Business Case for Action. So it basically makes a business case for why we need to look at biodiversity from an economic point of view altogether and from a financial sustainability point of view altogether. So this OECD report, coupled with the G7 report, was complemented by a further report or a further commitment then, which was presented to the ministers at the G7 meeting, and it led to a commitment by these G7 ministers around a call to action and a commitment from themselves on taking nature and biodiversity matters much more seriously into the future, putting it on par with the climate issues of today, calling the situation a crisis. And these G7 environmental ministers were joined by the European Union, who put their voices behind it as well, and a number of other countries from around the world. I know from Africa there were at least 2 countries that put their names down to this statement that came out, and we will post all these different documents on the platform we've just discussed, and we'll also share it with all the people that have attended today's webinar. So please take note of those 3 very important things that came into the world last week, and which we are very grateful for and very supportive towards. There was also a 4th process, and that was a letter that was written, and WWF spearheaded this initiative, a very high-level letter that was written by leaders from all walks of life around the world to the political leaders of the world, calling for greater action. And that was signed by over 400 leaders, including our own Secretary General from ICLEI and many others. So there was a lot of activity and response last week, and as I said, that really invigorated us to stand strong and to stand united in terms of what cities can and should be doing alongside other levels of subnational governments now, as we are preparing our voice, and also in the post-2020 framework. And then, yeah, just to say that one of the key things we should be bringing to the attention of these parties who will be adopting the post-2020 vision is that you know, there is a 2050 vision for biodiversity to live in harmony with nature by 2050. But we also need to recognize we're living in an urban century, and that already more than half the people on this planet are living in, many of them in rapidly urbanizing and expanding cities. And now more than ever, we need to embrace not only urbanism, which is there to stay, but also how we can bring back nature into that urban context. And this brings me very much to the next slide, Cities with Nature. This webinar is not about cities with nature, but I do want to draw your attention to that. This is an open platform. ICLEI is facilitating the platform, but we certainly don't own it. It is a wide open platform for any local and subnational government to engage with each other, learn from, inspire, and work together, and put their own targets and ambitions down there for others to see, their own plans, their own actions, but also report on their progress. And this Cities with Nature platform is supported by many local, national governments and other role players. And please look out for further announcements and encourage all your cities, large or small, developed or less developed, to engage at this platform. There's a lot to learn and share from all different role players active in this space around the world. We also support the position of involving local and subnational governments directly in national target setting, because we believe that it is there that we can ensure the buy-in and the maximization of collective efforts. And then basically moving on to the relationship between the biodiversity framework and other relevant processes. I've said it in Oliver's slides, just to say again, we should welcome that. We know, we working at the city space and at the subnational space, that there is no approach that can work if it's not systemic and if it's not fully integrated. Not only you know, in terms of speaking about the Rio Conventions and the Global Development Agenda, but also in terms of competencies and mandates at the city and subnational level. So the biodiversity framework process is really something that we believe really needs to get input from local and subnational governments. And we believe that that increasing global recognition is coming. And nature-based solutions actually do land at the local level. So we very much welcome the fact that nature-based solutions is a key work stream within the 2019 UN Climate Action Summit, which will take place later this year in September in New York. And we will make sure that we position local governments and subnational governments very well there. And thank you also to cities like Montreal, etc., who've already indicated their political leadership in this process. And then mainstreaming, I think here we just want to say that there are many examples of mainstreaming and of taking action on the ground by organizations like ICLEI and many others. There's, for instance, the Urban Natural Assets Project in Africa that's active in many African countries. There's a UNA is Urban Natural Assets for short, UNA Rivers, UNA Coasts, etc. There's an Interact Bio project which works on 3 continents, South Asia, Africa, and Latin America or South America. And then there's also a suite of different commitments from cities around the world under the Local Action for Biodiversity program. Implementation of an NBSAPs, I think we have spoken about that, and it's important to know that there is a sister initiative that was launched actually through the Local Action for Biodiversity program some 12 years ago to the NBSAPs, and that's called the LBSAPs, or Local Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan. And that whole methodology is something that really works at the local level and something we want to see happening more and more around the world. And then also the need to integrate diverse perspectives. Not everybody's going to land the post-2020 framework in the same way. Not everybody's implementing it in the same way. But collectively, I think it is very important to allow collective effort at their own pace and within their own context of that local paradigm and within the local priorities set by different actors and role players. So enough from me, Tim. I've spoken a lot. Apologies for that. I believe there's 1 or 2 people who may also want to make some input before we go over to the question session, but over back to you, Timothy.
Thank you, Kobe, for that great presentation and for presenting on behalf of Oliver as well in his absence. Before we open the floor for questions and discussion, similar to what we did this morning, I'd like to just call on Holger, if he's willing, to just give us a brief overview of the European regional consultation that he was able to attend. And I'm sure that through Holger's brief input, we will see the ways in which the regional consultations are very aligned to the agenda that Kobe has been presenting on. So Holger, if you're willing, over to you. Thank you.
He's just having a problem with his microphone, I think. But in the meantime, Holger, can you hear us? So Holger, I'm just going to say 1 or 2 words on what you told us about the European consultation, but if you manage to sort out your microphone, you're welcome to chip in at any moment in time. So in terms of these regional consultations, there are lots of regional consultations taking place at the moment. The one driven by the CBD, the Convention on Biological Diversity themselves, is taking place all over the world. There's been consultations already in Asia, in Europe, in Africa, There's one coming up later this month in South America, and ICLEI is trying to attend as many of these as possible. But anybody from this sector who's able to attend, please do attend and speak on behalf of your constituency. So Holger reported that it was a very active engagement in Europe, and basically that the sentiments that I described here about where they see things going, strengthening NBSAPs, making them more reportable, more unified, that sort of thing, that came out very strongly. It's also important that out of those meetings we came to understand that there are different moments in time where we as a subnational sector can formally engage with the process. And the first most important moment is at the open-ended working group, which I presented in one of Oliver's slides. The open-ended working group is taking place in August in Nairobi, and it's at that moment where we will be given a speaking slot and we will be able to present our document, our statement at that point in time. Bearing in mind it will still be draft, and bearing in mind that it will be shaped and reshaped again, but we cannot only come up with a statement and a collective voice when we go to China in 2020. By then the deal is done. By then it's just crossing the T's and dotting the I's. It's really at this very first open-ended working group and at the SBI meetings of the convention that we will be able to make inputs. And so we really call on everybody to mobilize and let us know what you'd like to say, what you'd like us to say on behalf of cities and subnational governments when we prepare for the August meeting, the open-ended working group engagement in Nairobi. It is only a mere 3 months away, so it's very important to get your inputs. This was also very much emphasized. A roadmap was shared by all the participants, with all the participants by the CBD, and that very same roadmap is available on our website. If you go and have a look at our post-2020 roadmap, you will see that roadmap. And that roadmap has got 2 columns. The one column really focuses on the CBD or the international engagements, and the other one lists the key moments in time when we as constituency will have meetings and opportunities of engagement. So we list quite a couple of these engagements in the coming months and in the year and a bit that is left before we all meet in China to finalize a new deal for nature. So I think that was the essence of what was discussed in the European consultation, and that is also being echoed now in the consultations elsewhere. As I said, the Latin American one is coming up, and we will be presented by the ICLEI, at least will be presented by the head of our Latin American office, South American office, and we will get that feedback. All that feedback that's coming in from the regional consultations will also be available and feed into the website that we are making available around the post-2020 framework. So I think if Holger is not able to speak, he says he's having problems, unfortunately, on his side to get heard. We're going to go into an opportunity for questions and any comments.
Yes, thanks, Kobe. As Kobe's reiterated, apologies, Holger's, there seems to be an issue with his headset or microphone, but thank you to Kobe for standing in there. So yeah, at this point, if there are any questions or discussions, we welcome them now. As I said before, you can ask by either raising your hand on the right or typing in the chat box. So we'll open the floor now for a few minutes if there's any questions.
Wow, it seems like our presentation was crystal clear. But it's a lot to take in, it's a lot to digest, and we are here. Please, you'll see our contact details up on the screen. We have some questions coming through, but just also to let you know that you're welcome to contact us with any comments, any ideas, any issues you want to discuss. You're welcome to contact our secretariat at the city's Biodiversity Centre at any stage.
So we have a question from Katya, and Katya is asking Kobe, on the issue of having more reportable and unified ALBI-SACs, have we been able so far to have indicators aligned?
So, Katja, thank you for that question. I just want to say that the indicator space is a notoriously difficult space when it comes to biodiversity and nature in cities. It's not as easy as in climate, where we can all collectively easily agree to a 1.5 degree target. And as we know, in the resilience side or the climate adaptation side, it's also more difficult to find indicators that everybody can align to and rally behind. So there are different sets of indicators, and really remarkable progress made over the last years in terms of indicators for measuring nature and biodiversity in cities. The one that stands out, of course, is Singapore's Cities Biodiversity Index, but there are many other examples as well. At the moment, the Singapore City Biodiversity Index is very much measuring biodiversity, species, that sort of almost species focused and biodiversity focused measurements and indicators, whereas there are a number of other processes underway, one specifically also driven by the IUCN Urban Alliance. Russell Galt, who's the director there, we're working closely with him as well. They're looking at it from a natural capital point of view and from an ecosystem-based approach, which is going to be very interesting to see what comes out of that process. And we are, as I said, engaged in that. But then there are also many other indicators that are coming forth. As we know that there's more and more science linking health and well-being with nature, and from the health sector, from the crime prevention sector in the Global South specifically, but also from the other social dimensions. Gender and those type of things are coming through. So we will see, I think, a mixture of softer indicators and harder indicators, and ultimately I think cities are going to have to choose what sort of indicator system works best for them. There's a strong call coming from a number of actors in this field, calling for less hard indicators in terms of species and biodiversity, or there's certainly saying there's a very, very much needed place for that. But in addition to that, they're also looking at maybe process indicators, where you measure where a city is at the moment and how far it progresses in terms of bringing nature into its planning decisions, bringing nature into its master plans, mainstreaming nature into its climate responses, mainstreaming nature into its curriculums at schools, into its engagements with communities, into bringing it into informal settlements and into livelihoods and economies, etc. The link with food, the link with water security and access, those things are also coming through. So I think we're going to see a not one size fits all. There's a place for many different approaches to indicators, and I don't think by 2020 this debate will be over. And I don't think it needs to be over. I think it needs to evolve. What we saw coming out of the IPB7 report and out of the climate world is that we know we do not have all the answers. We do not know exactly how to overcome these multiple and interconnected crises, in effect, that the world is facing at the moment, but we do know that we need to move forward. So there are wonderful initiatives that are coming out of this innovative space, like the London National Park City Initiative, where the indicators there is very much about how you're mobilizing your urban communities to take action. Some of them are rallying around hedgehogs or a specific park, or taking ownership of a specific tree planting target in a city. But it's very much about urban communities, enabling them to take action. So I think the indicator space is it's fascinating, very interesting, and yeah, we will see much more of that discussion coming through. But no, in short, my answer is no. There is no one single set of indicators, and they're not aligned at this stage. But there's use and there's merit in, I think, all the indicator processes that are currently underway.
Great, thanks, Kobe. And Katja, based on your responses, it looks like you're happy with that answer. So watch this space. It's certainly, there's a lot happening and will be happening in the future, and hopefully it will help in integrating different project results into, as you've suggested, the MBSAP processes. Are there any other questions at this point? Okay, everyone, so as you can see on your screens now, this is our process in a nutshell. This is essentially the roadmap up until 2020, a very summarized version of the various processes, frameworks that have governed and continue to govern this space. And as you can see, the red line represents the turning point, or the New Deal for Nature. In 2020, it coincides with COP15 and the 7th Global Biodiversity Summit. And then we've given some consideration to what would come post-2020, obviously the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, the subnational post-2020 roadmap, as well as the continuation and hopeful strengthening of our post-2020 platform as an integral part of our Cities with Nature partnership initiative. So thank you very much for joining us today. Oh, sorry, I see we have one more question from Katja. Also, how has it been, the African consultation, and any difference from the European?
Yeah, Katja, on that, just a very short question, a short response from our side. We were not able to be there, so ICLEI was not represented, but we did get feedback from a number of our close partners and allies that were there. It seemed like it was very much a similar discussion than the European one. Lots of energy, lots of demand for mainstreaming and making the linkages to other global processes, the SDGs particularly, the climate processes, etc., but also very much the call for urgent and transformative action. So same messages, I think, but in Africa, of course, we know that you know, people are in a way very much dependent on nature for their own livelihoods, and we find that many of our urban communities and our rural communities are very vulnerable. So the link between climate and nature is very strong in these discourses.
Great, thank you, Kobe. Yeah, I think just to thank Holger for your support in this webinar, and Katja for your questions, and to thank everyone else for being with us. It's been a very fruitful time. You can see our details on the screen now. As Kobe invited you to all, please share with your constituencies, share with your members, get in contact with us, provide your inputs through our various channels. And we will certainly share the links to the various documents that have been mentioned, as well as the different resources that have been mentioned in this webinar. So thank you for joining us, and we look forward to welcoming you again to the next webinar, webinar 3, on the 20th of June in the series. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Goodbye.